Today is Thursday, January 22nd, 2026, and you have reached the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here again with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace G. Smith. Mr. Smith and I agree today that we hope the literal stump grinding going on in the back of the building will not be noticed by our audience today.
Yeah, it is pretty loud here for us. We even did a test recording to see if we could hear it, and we couldn't hear it on the recording. But if you do hear it, don't think that's us clenching our teeth or the gears of our brains turning. That is some stumps being ground to nothingness outside here at our headquarters building.
Well, Mr. Smith, we talked about what to podcast about, and there's a lot of things. Very active world right now. Many things we could have talked about, but what did we isolate it down to?
Yeah, I had to say it is sort of like the world's on fire in many ways, and we'll talk about at least one reason why we're not talking about a lot of those things. I'm talking about this instead. But today, given all of those things, passions are high, and they are not only growing in terms of some things, but also the number of things going on in the world about which we can have high passions are growing. And so today we thought we would step back from all of it and try to encourage you to let you know that while many people in the world want to recruit your mind and put you at their service to talk about their ideas and what they think, don't let them. Push back. You have another perspective on which you need to take hold. And today we're going to talk about that. Thanks for waiting through the music. We know they don't make it hard. Easy on the ears. We appreciate Mr. and Mrs. Boyer for the intro music, and welcome again to the Living Youth Podcast. We really should explain and give a little more detail. There's so much going on in the world as we speak right now. For instance, we're in the United States. Our president, Mr. Donald Trump, is in Davos, where so many world leaders are there, and they're debating, how much. Well, actually, I think the Greenland thing is actually kind of settled, though, how it was and all of that. Stirring up allies that at least used to be allies. Are they so much more anymore? What's going on? You've got all the stuff going with ICE, the Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. In immigration, and I think it's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I think it's what ICE. It's just kind of become a word, ICE. Going on then in Minnesota, where it seems like the state is increasingly on fire. Not literally, though potentially. It seems to be going in that direction. So many things going on in the world. Europe recognizing they don't have America as a partner like they used to, and kind of coming together on so many things. Fiscal things. Honestly, the list is kind of going on in terms of different ways in which the world is on fire. And we are going to focus today on actually not getting caught up in the way that people out there are thinking on these things and focusing on these things from particular perspectives. And it's hard not to do that. Today, we want to help give you some particular principles, maybe just a bit of advice on how to avoid getting caught up in that thinking, because it is very easy to do. Even before we started recording here, Mr. Robinson and I were just talking about how you go back into our past, and I think I used to, even when I started to know better through God's church, I used to see things as kind of black and white so much out there in the world. Didn't you say you
oh, yeah.
kind of similar
same
thinking?
thing. It was a really handy, simple black and white paradigm, which my young brain appreciated. Don't trigger warning. Okay, I'm just explaining the way it was when I was growing up. We both grew up in Texas. Which was a fairly conservative state. And even then, so even to preface this, what Democrats used to stand for and what Republicans stood for had changed even by the time I'm paying attention to politics in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And so you had
international people out there, that's the two main parties in the United States. So
yeah. And they party. so I hear every conversation.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. But you had the Democrats, which was a little more of a liberal, and even then almost like kind of classically liberal, not even just entirely politically liberal. And then you had the Republicans, and they were accused of being the party for the rich. And at first I didn't see it, and then later I was like, no, I think it actually might be the party for the rich. But either way, you had this really simple paradigm, and it was hard for me not to view national politics and even world politics through that worldview. And decades have gone by, and I realized, what the Republicans are saying, what the Democrats are saying, and they've even changed so much from even what we're talking about growing up in Texas. It's kind of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
There's so much moral corruption that has occurred inside the United States, and I think we rightly believe this corruption is reaching a level to where, we're starting looking at God's intervention here, not just in America, though, but in the world. And so considering that you could have, because I don't know, get too much into the word I'm looking for is where you speculate. But I think the church has had a not ironclad, but general belief that when the United States and the other Israelite modern nations collapse, that it's a quick collapse, like a month.
Like prophecy talks about a bulge and a high wall. Yeah. You can kind of see it there, but the next thing you know, there ain't no wall because it is completely collapsed on you.
And so what I'm trying to say is, and this is, a lot of this goes to me because I am not a big long-term picture kind of person. I tend to, what's immediately on my doorstep, what I pay attention to. This is why I appreciate studying the Bible and getting better at understanding what God's doing in His plan. If you consider that the United States could go from potentially being a nation to an unrecognizable nation a month later, where should our focus be? Because getting involved in what's going on here politically, there's no benefit to that.
Right, and it's easy to think, I don't recognize the country anymore. Well, if it were like it used to be when you were growing up, would you recognize it? Oh yeah, then I would recognize it. Okay, so you're saying that's the way the country ought to be, and that is never what the message of Jesus Christ is. That there is some time in the past we should travel back to, in which everything was exactly the way it's supposed to be. If anything, Israel itself, ancient Israel, was kind of a disappointment from the beginning. They just look at the time of the judges, look at all of that. They never truly embraced everything that God wanted them to be and to do. And yeah, I can think back. It's even definitely before the church, but even getting into the understanding that we have through God and through Jesus Christ that are delivered in their church. Kind of losing a little perspective here and there. I remember, and I've mentioned it too many times on the podcast, I won't go into it again, but when the whole Bush versus Gore, in terms of what would become President Bush and what was the time Vice President Gore, Al Gore, in their election, and all the debates about, who really won Florida and all of that. And that was kind of a little bit of a political awakening for me in terms of seeing, different, I don't know, suddenly I'd noticed politics, Republican and Democrat. My family growing up had certain leanings. They were definitely not in the faith. And I kind of matched most of that, not all of that. But then my attention to the finer details of things really started to highlight, like, oh, that's a really wrong take, and that's a right take, and look at that. And next thing you know, you like this newspaper, but not that newspaper, and all that, and started to really sink in. And things seemed black and white, like Mr. Robinson was saying, kind of it was an illusion of black and white, but not because there isn't black and white. There is a line to be drawn, but that is between God and everything that's not Him. That is between what He stands for, how He wants to shape the world, what His message is, versus everything else. And it's very easy, and some of you out there listening to us might be thinking, but that's why I like the such and such and don't like the such and such, and fill in such and such however you want. Conservatives, liberals. In fact, even the party labels are starting to be kind of pointless in terms of that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how many so-called liberals are kind of thinking, wow, my side's kind of gone crazy. I sympathize more with the conservatives. And I see some conservatives thinking, wow, I can't believe our party's going to these lengths. I'm kind of sympathetic more to that. So it's amazing how God is just scrambling all the eggs, because all of man's ideologies just don't cut the mustard. They just don't, I think that's the proper phrase, cut the mustard, which does seem unusual.
Yeah.
One day I got to think about that, because all I can think of is yellow mustard, like you'd put on a hot dog, and that just doesn't seem to make sense. It's probably
I grew up fancier. We were a little more Dijon kind of mustard people.
Okay, I go back to the origin of that. I'll look it up because I can't help myself. But that said, it's very easy. But here's what we want to focus on in this particular program, is that the world is battling with the world's techniques. They're out there saying this, they're on Fox News or CNN or whoever it is, the talking heads saying this, and it's very easy to get caught up in that and think, yeah, that's right. When it comes to, let's just pick immigration. we could talk about that, because it's not just in the U.S. It really is an all over the world phenomenon.
It's a big Europe,
It is a
problem in Europe as well.
Oh, in Europe, it absolutely is. And it's easy to fall in one camp or the other. It's easy to fall in the camp where you feel like, well, these are the compassionate ones. They see these people suffering, and definitely there are people that come to Western countries because their country is terrible and they're trying to build a better world for their family, and they see that that's all they want. They've risked their lives for a better chance, and that's the and why can't we have Christian compassion? Why can't we do that? Then you fall on the other side that says, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country. I mean, there's got to be law and order, and we've got to have some kind of structure. We've got to be able to do these things, and every Christian should understand there's a law, and it's easy to start falling into one camp or the other, and then lose sight of the fact that, as we will get into, all of this, all of the way man does things is built on faulty foundations, and there's no way to repair the building without addressing the foundations.
I wish I had it now, but I actually saw, it's just the vast news feed these days, somebody who claimed that, I don't even have the detail, but here was the conclusion. The conclusion that America had gone too far down the path and couldn't be saved now. It's which makes sense, because I think if you look at something like the immigration thing, especially up in Minnesota, it's the same. In the American Civil War, which was the early 1860s, 1860 to 1864. You had the North and you had the South, and they were in geographically different places. This time, if there's a quote-unquote civil war in the United States, we all live next to each other. And so if one group is going to clean out the other group, well, how are you going to... I can see where it would be extremely difficult to unpack our problems and actually resolve it. So then you start thinking, whoa, what do we do? And it's like, well, I think God has a replacement plan in store for us. But, before we go on, because you have this here in the notes... when I was growing up, maybe I wasn't more naive than most, but I kind of feel like I was, about how powerful interests can manipulate large groups of people. And I thought, no, you can't manipulate me. I would know. And then when I was a kid, I remember, because this was a big deal at the time, some business agreed to pay $1 million for a 30-second Super Bowl commercial. And I thought, that's crazy. Why would anybody ever spend that kind of money? And then as I grew up, I realized, why? Because it works.
Right.
And so now, especially with social media coming online, again, we have these amazing social media tools that are so fun, but the people with special interests and a lot of power, and they know what they're doing, they know how to influence people on there. And so an encouragement, especially to the young, and I know that the parents will understand this so much better, we're often manipulated and we don't even realize it.
Right.
And then through this process of manipulation, they kind of get us on board and use us as an extension of their power.
Right. So that definitely is one thing to keep in mind. The idea that somehow I'm thinking my own thoughts, I'm being my own man. I'm sorry. There are very powerful people that are out there, and powerful institutions that are using the tools at hand, which have their fingers in our brains in some ways, to kind of get their own messages out. And even more broadly than that, you have just, even if you want to say, no, I think this is a grassroots organization. I think let's just say somehow they've avoided all the money and influence and this and that. These are just real Joes like me, or Janes. Joes or Janes. These are real people just like me. And, look at this meme they put out, that just really nails it. That's it, that you retweet or repost or whatever the case might be. And when it comes to X, which used to be Twitter, I think we still say retweet. I don't really know. Repost probably, but I still say tweet.
I guess Re-X doesn't
Re-X makes no sense. I just refuse to call it X. But anyway, regardless, at the same time, are you really thinking your own thought? Really, you are amplifying a message. It may be your cohorts in common sense, but God doesn't want us to be drafted into anybody else's fight. I don't care if it's wealthy people on the right, wealthy people on the left. I don't care if it's just your neighbors get together and have this kind of big political cause that they want to push. God doesn't want us drafted into these other social movements and this. He doesn't want us being mouthpieces for them any more than he would have wanted in Christ's day Christians then to be mouthpieces of Herod, or mouthpieces for the anti-Herod folks, or mouthpieces for the Roman government, or mouthpieces for those who recognize that, who thought that, we need to rise up, we need to be independent of Rome, we got to control our own future religiously and politically. The fact is, Jesus Christ has captured us, and God the Father has captured us for their purposes only. And He doesn't want to loan us out like mercenaries in other causes. And yet, the entire world, from the highest people in positions of government or economy to simply the lowest foot soldiers on the ground that have their own idea of a rebellion to do, they all want to enlist your mind for their purposes. And the point today is for you to not let that happen. And it is tempting.
My wife shared with me recently an actual strategy, which she said she later recognized really was true. It doesn't have to be Facebook, but you're scrolling through your feed, your news feed, and it's a terrible news story, then another terrible news story, then another terrible news story, then a positive news story, and then an ad. And it's boosted ad whatever it is where you
revenue or whatever, clicks and such.
I want to build ever so slightly on what you just said, because I love that, because this helped me a lot, actually. The idea that when you're called, and even if you're a youth and you haven't been baptized yet, hopefully you're on that path, but you're within this sphere, this realm of being a part of God's plan going forward,
right?
And that we are ambassadors. So then you think, I am ambassadors. What does that mean? Well, that means if you're an ambassador of the heavenly Jerusalem, which is we could do a whole podcast on that, but we're viewed as people traveling through a foreign land as an ambassador for the coming kingdom of Jesus Christ. And that helped me a lot, which means if you're an ambassador, you're not going to get involved in general in any kind of local things that are going on. I would wonder, here's the most recent thing I saw that I thought was pretty obvious manipulation. We'll see if you have to cut this out. But I remember as war was looming, and I think Biden hadn't been in office very long, because I'm trying to track back how long ago it was.
Mr. Biden.
President Biden, right? Sorry about that. How effectively Russia was painted as a dark enemy and Ukraine was painted as these liberators. And I'm not even talking about in the church. And I'm just talking about how when the war actually started, how many Americans had Ukrainian flags out in front of their house, or Ukrainian bumper sticker on their car. And I guarantee you that 80% of Americans could not have picked out Ukraine on a map. But how the messaging about Russia bad, Ukraine good, getting people out to support Ukraine, that blew me away. I was like, how many people, do you even realize that Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union? There's so much history there that people don't know, but we've chosen sides.
Right, and that's a really good way to put it, because we are not political here on the program. We could bring out disclaimer guy, but I think our own disclaimers are strong enough. But that is exactly right. And on one hand, you could say, "Oh, is that manipulation?" Well, I think it's actually just picking a side and wanting to get everybody else on that side, and that's what the world does. There's an old musical that I remember as a concept album. It came out way back in the 80s or so, and it's never really turned into a good musical. The concept album is still the better version of it. But in it, there's a song titled Nobody's on Nobody's Side. And that's just generally the case. And so, yeah, you bet. And there were those out there then reacting to that wanted to make sure you knew, no, that's a terrible idea. The Ukrainians, they've got Nazi parties there. They've actually been terrible in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And everyone is out to convince you of things. But here's the thing. They want you to be a part of their cause, whether it's some social justice cause, whether it's a woke cause, whether it's an anti-woke cause, right? They want you to be a part of that. And yet God has blessed you with the ability to stand apart from that. And like Mr. Robinson just nailed it with this idea of being an ambassador. We might even have a scripture about that. I'm not sure if I have that one in these notes. But as an ambassador, just imagine you're an ambassador walking through, whether it's ancient Assyria or modern China or whatever, Are you there to tell them how to run their business according to their laws and what they're fixing their problems according to their principles? Are you there to represent something else? Are you there to represent another land, another country, another completely different ruler who's not all a part of what they're doing?
I'm glad you suggested we look it up, because this is actually more on the nose than I thought. There's two. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 20. I'm sure our ministerial friends out there were yelling at the radio, telling us so.
Here's the verse. You should know this memory verse.
Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ. As though God were pleading through us, we implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. That is a very, very different mission than what the rest of humanity is at work doing.
It is. We are not trying to change policy. We're not trying to say this is a good policy or that is a bad policy. We're literally pleading that be reconciled to God. His kingdom is coming, and you have an opportunity to be a part of it or not. In fact, before we jump into the kind of three sort of pieces of advice we want to give you today, I would encourage you. It's not out yet, I don't think, but it should be coming out soon. Mr. Rod McNair gave a sermon here in Charlotte titled, I think I can get it. It's kind of a long title, but it's a good one. Because Our Citizenship is in Heaven. Mr. Robinson, I know him well enough to know he'd want to put a ... after that, though I don't think the title does. Ooh. He loves him some ... But the title is Because Our Citizenship is in Heaven, and he goes through like when it comes to voting or jury duty or participating in the military, he talks through what are the consequences of that. The fact that our citizenship truly is in heaven, and it's worth a listen. I hope that you will, whenever it does come out, that you will listen to that. So from this perspective, knowing that really people out there, whether it's high powers of influence or whether it's just simply your neighbor, the fact that they want to draft you for their cause, we want to give you a few pieces of advice. And I'm not saying these are worded brilliantly, but these are the way that I worded them. They're the way they will be worded. The first one, and to me, it helps from a mindset perspective. Don't let anyone enlist your mind for their mission. Now, here's the thing. If they enlist you, how do they enlist you? By making you think their mission is your mission. You're going to think like, you might think no one is actually doing that. No one's truly trying to enlist me. When I sit at Facebook or I sit on Instagram or whatever, this is just me. I'm posting what I want to post. I'm sorry, it's happening all the time. I see it on social media. I see people who aren't running for office or this or that, but still it's, the Democrats this, or the Republicans that, or the liberals this, or the conservatives that, or the left-wingers this, or the right-wingers that. And what we think is, I'm just expressing my opinion. But when we do that, we may not realize it, but we have been essentially mobilized and weaponized in a war that we're not a part of. That's not a part of our battle. We're not trying to fight the wars of this world to fix its policies. We've been called apart from that.
As many genuine atrocities and travesties as there are out there in the world, and they should move our heart. We should feel sympathy and sadness in the right measure. Getting pulled into trying to do something about it is where we have to be very careful, because we already have a full-time mission.
Oh yeah. In fact, the very fact that something pulls our heart, that's what they're going to. That's what's
right. That's part of the strategy.
Yeah. If it were things that you weren't interested in, we wouldn't have to warn you about anything. If it's things that you didn't care about.
And one other thing you might have to do in the long run, you have to evaluate this for yourself, is what I did was I just pulled back on everything. It's like if you're just seeing stuff and it's another thing that's a problem and it's not right and you want to say something about it or like something or retweet, as we already discussed. Everyone, she's going to get mad at me. Every once in a while, my wife sees something on there and she says, do you think should I respond? And I'm like, all right, what is it? It's like almost never should you respond. And so, but then like one of the way, like my way of dealing with those kinds of things is I stop taking it in, and like I should say I'm down too, because YouTube's got its own problems. But I don't watch TV anymore, but that's because what I consume is through YouTube. But I went off X years ago I'm old school. Back when it was called
Back when it was called Twitter.
Yeah, and I went off of Instagram, and actually one of the reasons I went off Instagram was actually one of these big kind of social justice kind of things.
Oh, really? See that, and that's what I think some don't want to hear. They want to hear, okay, yeah, I won't get engaged, but you have to actually examine yourself, because part of the problem really could be just that that you're being fed by it, and it's hard not to engage. So you want to engage and take all this stuff into your eyes and into your brain, but don't want to engage. And yet what's being fed into your eyes is an effort to enlist you to engage. Mr. Robinson actually asked me about it off the air. I like saying off the air. That sounds very fancy.
It does.
But that's part of what the algorithms do. Is what do they feed you? They feed you what statistically, algorithmically, they can determine is likely to engage you. You're literally engaging with something by taking it in, something that was designed to increase the odds you're going to engage with it.
Yep.
We were just talking earlier, one of our favorite biblical examples of kind of getting caught up, being drawn in, is right there in Acts chapter 19.
Especially because I think, especially to us as modern humans, it's kind of amusing.
It really is. And it's very, even though this is the first century, it's still very 21st century as well. So essentially you had, Paul going around saying, hey, don't worship idols. And then you got an idol maker saying, well, this is going to be bad for business. I don't think I like this. And so doing his best to kind of stir people up and get a riot going, talk to other business owners saying, hey, look, this is going to ruin real business for us.
If this takes root, we're in big trouble.
We're in big trouble. And successfully getting kind of a riot going. He tells, we're not going to read the whole account. It'd be tempting. But in Acts 19, verse 28, he's telling these guys, verse 20, I can't not do 25. He says that he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, man, that from this business we have our wealth. This is what we need to get going. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying the gods made with hands, that's their product, by the way, are not gods. And there's a danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess. Now he's attaching it to this big larger thing. But the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence. She whom all Asia and the world worship.
I'm already ready to start saying, boo, boo.
See, he had a personal interest, but now he's tied it into this broader thing. And what happens? Verse 28, when they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And so they start this chanting. And you go on, it's just so fun to listen. I mean, to read the whole thing. It says the city in verse 29 was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging them. And Paul wants to go talk to the people. The disciples try to stop him. It even says in verse, I'm reading, sorry, I read all that. Sorry, I was doing some research earlier from the English Standard Version. That's why it sounded kind of different for me. Sorry about that. That was an accident. I meant to read from the New King James Version. Even saying Artemis, I was like, hey, what is going on? So anyway, accidental version change, but the content is still the same. But I'm back in the good old, my personal favorite, New King James Version again. So in verse 28, it says, recasting that, when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, great is Diana of the Ephesians. And actually, even in verse 31, it says these officials of Asia, who actually were friends of Paul. So he actually was known by some of those people. They're like, hey, dude, do not go out there. That is a huge mistake. But Paul, he's wanting to go out. Why does he want to go out?
Encouraged him.
This is more people to hear the gospel. I'm going to go out there and tell them all. But anyways, they're getting upset. Then this one fella is brought out, Alexander. He's Jewish, and he's put forward, and he's gonna try to explain to everybody. But then verse 34, this actually sounds like it just came out of today. It says, but when they found out he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, great is Diana of the Ephesians. They were not going to listen to this Jewish guy. But here's the point that grabbed me. For 2 hours. 2 hours. And, it struck me, that's kind of like the chanting you see these days for the street riots and stuff. They come up with all their claims, trans rights or human rights or whatever it is, and they just kind of go on and on and on. It's like tactics haven't really changed. But I missed the verse I really wanted to highlight. Was it verse 32? Yeah, the verse 32. It says, some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they'd come together. You just get caught up, in the spirit of everything. But with that, 2 hours. Now, here's the thing. That happens today, but it's not just in the street. It happens online. And how do they keep it up, quote unquote, for 2 hours? Is they recruit you. your repost of that meme, whether it's for stronger borders or, against stronger borders, whatever it is, when you jump in with your meme, with your retweet, with your repost, you're just a part of the crowd that is chanting their message. You've just jumped into the world's things. I just think it's really funny. I just want to share. Well, then you have become their amplifier. You've become their bullhorn. And I'm not even saying they all manipulate. No one actually said, hey, I want to try to trick this guy into posting this. And yet he didn't have to trick you because you chose to post it anyway. So
great points.
Is it? Well, I hope so. This is an unpopular opinion today, at least in the world. But because Mr. Robinson and I are here to be popular. In fact, we were reflecting that two of our least popular, if you, not by views, but if you are listens, but thumbs down on YouTube, two of our least popular podcasts have been one talk about how we don't vote and we don't get involved in politics. And I think those have the highest proportion of thumbs down from listeners.
The urge, I don't know what it is. I would actually be fascinated if somebody had a really big study on it and could bring some more light to this topic. But we are opinion people, and I heard
as a species even.
Yeah, I heard one guy's theory one time that most people, so it's on a subject they're not familiar with, most people do not have an opinion, and when they're suddenly asked at dinner or in front of other people what their opinion is, they take about 10 seconds to form one, and here is their new opinion, and that they tend to hold on to it strongly for far longer than you would think. And I think I've done that before.
Yeah, psychologically, and this is it can be an evil tool in marketing that I've seen. Is once someone has an opinion, they will, even if it was poor formed, they'll move heaven and earth to defend it, and will hold on to it, like you said, far longer than they should. And their brain, Jeremiah 17:9 is true of all of us, will come up with reasons not only that it was the best opinion in the world, but they didn't form it in 10 seconds. Actually, it was well founded. Here's the unpopular opinion. You know what? You don't have to express your opinion. The world says the opposite. No, make your voice heard. You have a voice. The world needs to hear you. And it's not the opposite that you don't have a voice. You do, but you have free will in choosing to use it. And the fact is, you don't have to express your opinion. You know who didn't always express his opinion? Jesus didn't. And so there's a model. I love this passage, and you might think I'm making too much of it. I do not think I am. In Luke chapter 12, and the passage I'm reading is in verses 13 and 14. It says, here's these people that are coming to Jesus Christ as an authority, as a teacher. They see him as someone who understands the law, and who is really teaching to them in a way that others haven't. It says in verse 13, then one from the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. In verse 14, Jesus said to him, Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator over you? Now, some would say, well, he was probably trying to use Jesus to get him on his side, because that's going to trump whatever argument. And I'm not saying that wasn't necessarily the case. Humans are humans.
But that would preclude that Jesus Christ was quite capable of understanding what was going on and actually rendering a proper judgment.
That's exactly right. And regardless, Jesus didn't call him out for his attitude or this or that. He mainly just said, I haven't been appointed to take care of this scenario. Go take care of it the way you're supposed to.
I like this a lot. No, I don't think you're making too much of it.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Especially when you put it in the context, you and I have been talking about this a lot lately. This what Jesus Christ was here to do. And you know what he wasn't here to do? Adjudicate every small discrepancy or disagreement, and let alone like bigger ones. Because, again, in fact, that's your next scripture, John 18:36.
It is. And before I get there, because I hadn't thought about it until we were preparing for this podcast, the next verse I think is relevant. It says, he said to them, Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. Why is this important right after what he just said? It's interesting because this guy either has a case or doesn't have a case, right? He's either the law's on his side or it's not on his side. And Jesus Christ actually elevates the whole conversation to focus on his unique message, which is, you know what? God is concerned about covetousness. Don't be covetousness. It's kind of like what Paul says later. Sometimes it's better to be wronged than to give in to the kind of spirit that those arguments
you're really
have.
Stepping on toes, Mr. Smith. I was thinking about this earlier now that you've made this point, and we could go off. Look, half the country's going to be iced in this weekend. People want a long podcast this time. But it's fascinating the way Jesus Christ, we're talking about the gospel accounts specifically, how he approached these kind of things and how he taught, and how hard the Pharisees and the Sadducees tried to draw him in on these like edge case questions, like the woman who was married to 7 brothers in a row, he's like, he skips the entire argument and the debate that they want to do and goes straight to the point that they're missing. And he does this over and over again. And what you almost never see him do, in fact, he probably never does it, but I'm reluctant to go that far. He doesn't weigh in on he doesn't feel like he has to share his opinion with everybody.
Right. And that was that. So yeah, we'll go ahead and go to John 18:36. We're kind of touching on what will be the next point here, it's a nice lead up, but we'll wrap up with this first.
Good notes.
Well, yeah, we'll see. So John 18 and verse 36, famous statement, but it needs to be more than famous. It needs to be internalized. Jesus Christ before Pilate says the following. He says in verse 36, he's answering Pilate, and he says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." That could be the theme of this entire podcast. We cannot get drawn into this kingdom's, the wars and battles for the policies of these kingdoms, when the kingdom we're here to represent it isn't even of this world. It's not a matter of clean secular border policy, or in terms of, for that matter, what's the right approach on drug policy, or what's the right approach on this, or should this law be passed so that people get to keep more of their earnings, instead of having to be taxed on it. Jesus Christ says, man, I am not here to rule the kingdoms of this world and to somehow infuse my goals with the leaders of this world, so they'll start. No, I've actually got a kingdom coming later. Yes, I am a king, but it is a later kingdom, and my servants thus will not be fighting in this world over this world's things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's if you go really big picture, what have we seen over the last 2,000 years? And I think this is a big part of what Jesus Christ, the point he was trying to make there in Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7, which was, because I wouldn't say as soon as, but after Jesus Christ was crucified and died and went back to the Father in heaven, they had a period of relative peace where, and I think this was probably quite by design, so that they could have a chance to get the church going and be ready for when things later caused them to actually all go back home. There's when Stephen was stoned and died, and then people spread and went back home and started spreading the gospel. So you needed some time. But when the Romans came in because of another Jewish rebellion and destroyed the temple, once again a war, and he warns of wars and rumors of wars and all these things that are going to happen. And so if you come all the way down to our time right now, I don't want to be cynical about this, but when Russia invades Ukraine, it's like, guess what? Another war, and we have no end of the wars in human time, and no end, again, of travesties and things that shouldn't be happening. But as the scriptures we've read today, I hope has aided our listeners today to just remember why we're here, where the kingdom is, and that we're ambassadors representing that kingdom, and when we're not getting involved in local affairs.
Right. So that another reason to not do that is in our next point. Well, I'll do my best to force myself to move on, and that is this. It helps me. The first point, just in case you lost it in all of our, I was going to say wisdom, but I won't go that far. But the first point was, don't let anyone enlist your mind for their mission. Yep. And it doesn't have to be manipulators. Sometimes it's just, I'm going to repost that or that. Well, be evaluative. However, here's a second point. Always remember, the real problems are deeper than virtually anyone out there says. So now I say virtually because Tomorrow's World exists, the magazine, and the telecast, but the real problems are far, far, far deeper than any of the talking heads that you're seeing, etc. And the verse that I go to a lot for this kind of thinking and related to this is one of my longtime favorites, is Psalm 11 and verse 3, where it says very plainly, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And really, Mr. Robinson used a great analogy of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Mr. Rod McNair used that analogy in a sermon once also when he said, man, getting caught up in the things of this world is just like what Mr. Robinson said, rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic, when we're supposed to be on the lifeboat saying, get off the boat, So, get out here. And it's kind of the same thing with the foundations. It was a great moment. And that's kind of what Psalm 11:3 says here, is that, look, everybody in the world, they're doing their best to kind of, I think the building should look this way. The columns go here, that doesn't support a roof right. And he says, and yet they don't even notice the very foundations are destroyed. And just because you're righteous, what are you going to do? How are you going to build on this broken foundation? And the fact is that we can't. This is often way truer than we give it credit for. And when I say we, let me say me. It's easy for me to see some current dilemma and to think, oh, here's the right point of view. They're missing it. And it's this. And yet, if God has shown me anything in these things, is that he actually tends to be thinking about 3 or 4 levels deeper than almost anybody else is. You look, for instance, with all the debate about borders and ICE and all the immigration problems. And, we can think we're boiling it down to fundamentals. Like, for instance, try to get both, multiple sides. We need to enforce the laws. A country can't exist without real borders. Or it's like, well, no, we've forgotten our purpose of a country, that we were made of immigrants, people coming from different places. And people think they're getting down to the basics on either side of these things. Right. And yet the problems are so fundamentally deeper than all of that. It's not that some of those things may not be true, but in the end, they're relatively trivial, and none of them fundamentally fix the problem. They might delay the problem further. Say you do firm up the border, or you do this or that. They might firm it up, but Mr. Robinson was highlighting, when you look in the Bible, I said this before we actually started recording, that when the Bible does talk about Israelite countries having difficulties in terms of what to do with the presence of other people of other nations in their borders, or, it's not easy. It's easy to think of the illegal immigrant, but not think of, say, the foreign corporation that owns one of your companies that is making money. So foreign involvement. What God doesn't say is, the problem is ancient Israel is that you didn't obey me and have a good, firm border policy.
Right.
He says, what the problem is? You're sinning. He says, You're a bunch of sinners and you disobey me, and so I'm not blessing you in the ways that you'd be blessed. And that's what it is. And what you don't see is anyone on either side, whether it's Mr. Donald Trump or whether it's whoever you might think of as leaders on the side opposing him, saying, hey, what the problem is? We all need to turn to God. We need to turn to God, to obey his laws, to seek after the face of his son, and all these things will be rectified. And if they're not saying that, I don't care what policy they come up with. I don't care what new enforcement agencies they put together. The problem will not be solved.
Right. You might... Our listeners might want to review Deuteronomy 28 and some of the long-term prophecies for it. These tend to be dual. Ancient Israel had this kind of problem, but then modern Israel also has this problem. And one of the signs and the punishments, frankly, that the nation had grown very corrupt in the land. And it's, if I may make this note, I actually like to make this note. The nations that were in the land before Israel acted corruptly, and God cast them out, kicked them out. But in a sense, he held Israel to the same standards. It's not exactly the same, because he certain truths were revealed to Israel that weren't to these other nations. But he says, look, when you get really corrupt in the land, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. There's going to be a lot of stuff. And one of them was Deuteronomy 28 and verse 43. The alien who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. But circling back to your point, which was my point before the show, exactly right. It's not that we don't have a good border policy or we haven't been enforcing our borders and all those kind of things. It's something that God prophesied. Can I say it that way? God prophesies through his
the consequences of sin, right?
And we are reaping it. You wouldn't. That's my point when I was saying back in my 20s. You could have never imagined it's to the level it is now, and what it's doing to the country in some regards. The solution is not stronger.
It's not. It's just not. The thing is, and if it just, if it solves one problem, it doesn't mean like the ancient mythical Hydra, it doesn't pop up two more problems. There's never going to be fully human ways to fix things. You have to fundamentally get to the root. And in this one, how deep does it go? Well, all the way to the point that we don't even define nations the way when God reforms the world, nations are going to be defined differently. Our nations today are defined mostly politically in most cases. Like, what does it mean to be an American? Well, it means to actually be an American citizen, the politics, the political definitions. It's part of the geography, being under one government. But God is going to rebuild the world under Jesus Christ. Well, Christ will come. He will take over. He will rebuild the world. Nations are going to be redefined. But to do that, how much deeper is that? It's not just enough to decide what a nation is supposed to be. You have to fix the family.
Yep.
The family has to be fixed because nations are families grown large, and you've got to have the family right. And it's not enough to have the family right. You got to have marriage right. And not just marriage right doesn't just mean, oh, good, a man and a woman, that's it. No, there's so much that's involved with that. The foundations go deep and they go profound. And unless you're willing to address those, the best you can do is put off problems.
Yep.
That's all you can do.
In support of that, it hasn't been in the news so much lately, but, the Russians fought a long and bloody war in Afghanistan. And then, we came in and spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and next door to them is Pakistan. And you wonder, why can't we get a handle on this? Why can't there be, this area of the world brought under control? Well, who doesn't really know who Afghanistan is? The people living there, because it's a whole bunch of tribes. The lines were drawn by people not Afghans and Pakistanis, and it's tribal allotments for them there. And so some of these modern solutions don't work because the borders we build, the people we try to put in charge, well, that's from another tribe, or that's not our.
Yeah, they
tribal
think very
boundary
differently.
area. Yeah.
That's right.
And it crosses over into Pakistan. We should almost view Afghanistan and Pakistan as kind of one geographical area in some sense with these tribes. I'll give you another example, and we're probably getting too many examples. Ukraine is like that a little bit as well. It's not clean cut. It's not. There's Russians in Russia, and in Ukraine there's Ukrainians. There's tens of millions of Russians lived in Ukraine before the war, and still do. And so even in Ukraine, it's kind of messy because it's not just Ukrainians. It's a mix of other people, but especially Russians that are in there. And then if you go back, boy, I'm going to really step on toes here. Again, most people think that Putin is a tyrant and invaded Ukraine because he wants to get more territory. But even politicians like Robert F. Kennedy, I listened to him on a podcast detail this, and I had heard this before from another politician who really more of he was in the Reagan and then Bush administration. He said exactly the same thing, which is NATO has taken in more and more countries and kind of arrived at Russia's doorstep, and it makes them super nervous that NATO, which is not their friend, is right up on their doorsteps. And Ukraine was kind of the last red line. I'm not asking you to choose a side. I'm just saying that from Russia's perspective, they've been encroached upon.
Right.
But from the Western perspective, no, it's Russian. Putin's a tyrant. I'm not making excuses for Putin. By all accounts, he's done a lot of terrible things to maintain control. He's ex-KGB. So it's not hard to imagine that he was ruthless to maintain his power. The point is, things are usually much deeper than we realize.
Yeah, they really are. And to think, oh, well, we'll fix it by this. We stop him. Or the solution is NATO shouldn't have done that. NATO should have, kept its boundaries. If we think that's it, and we're posting on Facebook saying such things, we have missed the point. The problems are so much more fundamentally deeper than that. And God didn't actually call us to argue in favor of a strong NATO, or in favor of a restrained NATO, or in favor of to condemn, say Vladimir Putin, or to make excuses for him. The problem, he called us to actually talk about the real concerns and the more fundamental things that only Jesus Christ and his church have to offer. It's interesting. Nowhere that I can find in recorded sermons and messages of the New Testament church in Scripture are there comments about how those of this world should fix their world using their tools and their politics and their rules. Instead, I see a very different perspective, and one that can seem kind of harsh. I have two passages in mind. One is in Philippians 2. Let's see, I'll start in verse 12. Philippians 2, starting in verse 12. Paul writes, "Therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Do all things without complaining and disputing." And it is interesting how many people, that's the main reason they go on Facebook or stuff, is to kind of complain about some aspect of the world or to kind of get involved in some kind of disputation or argument about things. Why? Verse 25, "that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." Now, if you shine as lights in the world, you're supposed to be shining like Christ in the world. John chapter 1 points out he is the light. You are shining the light of Jesus Christ in the world, not the light of my favorite conservative commentator or the light of, oh, this one guy who really, man, he really speaks truth to power. In that world, Paul is talking about being separate from all of this, being blameless and harmless, where actually people from both sides might look at you and say, well, I don't like that he wasn't a part of my side, but I can't argue with the fact that he's a good guy. You know, I mean, he actually stands for something I don't recognize in the world.
I mean, Jesus Christ managed to make the Pharisees and the Sadducees work together. That's how popular his take was on these
good common enemy. And when I talk about how this can seem harsh, it's actually Jesus Christ's words that I can think of as harsh, but I see how they apply to this. To me, in Luke chapter 9, you have this fellow in verse 59. It says, Jesus says to him, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." Now, by the way, that doesn't mean like the funeral was just 5 minutes away and he was going. No, this is like
very important to know.
It is very important. This is more like his father might be aged, was close to, who knows how many years he had left, and hey, let me go and make sure this is taken care of. And then once I take care of that, then I'll follow you. Yeah. Well, that's the exact opposite of Luke 14, where he says, "Who comes to me must hate father, mother." You got to put me first. But it's Jesus' response that is just like it can seem harsh, but remember, this is coming from the Son of God. In verse 60, Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and preach the kingdom of God." Yeah. Now, he wasn't saying abandon your father. Then he would be accused. He would be like not honoring your father or mother. But he is saying, you know what? Apart from the gospel, they're dead out there. Let them bury their own dead, but you preach the only message that makes a difference.
Because all those other people are going to go their own way.
Right.
It's all going to end the same. They're going to have disputes and difficulties and trouble, and natural disasters are going to occur, and everyone's eventually going to die. But the one thing that you can do and that you can focus on that will lead to eternal life is the mission of God. I was thinking about this now, just Mr. Smith. I know we're probably ready to go into our next point. You and I are trying to bring out lots of scriptures there, and I feel like we're doing a good job of it.
I hope so.
Trying to help people understand how we don't get involved in the world's activities because we have our hands full with our own godly mission. I was thinking I would actually challenge anybody to study the New Testament, which is a lot, and see if you can find any scripture or anything in there that would lead you to believe there's worldly activities we should get involved with. I mean, we almost don't even have to prove it. It's almost like you would need to prove to me that there's anything in the Bible that, and I know that there's mainstream Christian apologists out there that can take some of the scripture and try to make it sound that way. I heard one time use Jesus Christ turning over the tables, the money changer tables. And said, "Oh, see, he'll get physical and get active," and it's like I don't think you understand what's going on there.
Yeah, you don't understand actually what they were guilty of in terms of God's own things as merchandise. Hopefully, I think that resonates with the last few verses that we might do today, since given that we're coming up on an hour.
I have one that I would like to do in conclusion when we get there.
Oh, sure. Okay, good. The last point that we'll make today, and there is this comment that we just mentioned in Luke chapter 9 that is kind of related to that. If you want to really keep the world from recruiting you for their own purposes, then remember your unique purpose to preach the gospel to the world, announcing the coming reign of Jesus Christ. We said from the beginning, we are advanced ambassadors of a kingdom, not in that way citizens of this kingdom trying to fix it. Again, I'm going to point you to Mr. Rob McNair's sermon coming out, Because Our Citizenship is in Heaven, because it is really very good in this regard. But in particular, I kind of thought about this, that there were some times where Jesus had something to say to Herod, King Herod. Now, you can read Josephus and such, and Herod was a monster.
Yeah.
If there was any politician that needed to reform himself politically, it would be Herod. It's not that Jesus ever actually delivered. Well, one of them he did deliver in person. I'll get to him. All right, one of those messages for Herod, if you will, is in Luke 13. In Luke 13, you have that Jesus has not been arrested yet, so he is still at large, if you will, giving his message. And in Luke 13 and verse 31, someone tells him that, Herod's coming after you. And Luke 13 and verse 31, it says, "On that very day, some of the Pharisees came, saying to him, 'Get out and depart from here, for Herod wants to kill you.' And he said to them, 'Go tell that fox,'" not a lion, by the way, "go tell that fox, 'Behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected. Nevertheless, I must journey today, tomorrow, and the day following, for it cannot be a prophet should perish outside Jerusalem.'" So Herod sent a message. They've sent a message. Oh, he wants to kill you, and Jesus Christ didn't modify his agenda for that. Herod could do whatever he wants to. You know who's in charge of the timetables? Almighty God. He's not going to vary because of what Herod says. And what he doesn't tell him is something about his policies. He doesn't tell him something about how you've truly mistreated the people. You should take care of them. You're a ruler. You should. No, he actually told him, well, here's what I'm going to keep doing. I don't really care what he says, going to kill me, not kill me. I'm going to cast out demons. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to heal people today and tomorrow. And then the third day, I'm going to be perfected. I'm going to finish my mission. Herod had nothing to do with that. And he didn't address the policies of Herod. His message to Herod was actually, say whatever you want. I'm going to keep doing what God sent me to do. And I'm going to finish that work. Your opinion of it is irrelevant. But then, and I thought, I wish I could say that this is my own take, but it's not. I saw it recommended, and I thought, the more I thought about it, I thought, ooh, I really like this. And that's in Luke 23. In Luke 23, this is after Jesus has been arrested, and he sends another message to Herod. He said this time it's in person. So in Luke 23, starting in verse 8, he says, "Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him." He's looking to see... He wants Jesus to do something. I mean, heal somebody, levitate, raise the dead, do something. I've heard about all these miracles that you do.
We just heard a sermon here about Naaman. He expected Elisha to come out and wave
your
his
hands.
around.
That's
Yeah.
right. And then verse 9, it says, "And so Herod, questioned him," Jesus, "with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him with a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate." In a sense, that was a message. I mean, he didn't say a word, but the fact is, Herod wasn't in charge. Herod wasn't even worthy of a word of response.
Yep.
Jesus Christ was there to do a mission, and his mission was irrelevant, what Herod was going to do or not. He wasn't going to dance for Herod. He wasn't going to perform for him. He wasn't going to serve him one way or the other. He wasn't going to give him a story he could tell other people. Look how this guy supported me, or look how he didn't and I still killed him. He just gave him nothing but static, because he was there for a mission that in a sense had little to nothing to do with Herod.
Yeah. No, that is a good one. Since I can see the notes and where we're going, and I saw where this was headed, I was like, that's actually a really good point, because that backs up all our other advice, counsel, maybe a better word, of how to handle these kind of things. And one of them is, don't have an opinion, or if you have an opinion, don't share it. Just...
Yeah, what purpose are you serving when you do? I mean, actually think about that. The world has taught us, especially here in the United States and in other parts of the West, that you don't need to serve your purpose with an opinion. There's value in just sharing your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a virtue, virtually, to be someone to share your opinion. And you know what? Did Jesus Christ have some opinions about Herod? Oh, I don't think they were opinions. I think they were facts. Jesus dealt in facts. But you know what? it wasn't part of the mission at that time. If anything, the silence, being a lamb going to your slaughter, was what served the mission. I'm not actually going to turn there in John 19, and this is I think the last scripture I want to offer. I definitely want to know what yours is, Mr. Robinson. I'm giddy with anticipation, but in John 19, it does relate how Jesus Christ is before Pilate, and I'm actually not going to refer to it. I'm going to refer to a musical performance of it.
Oh boy,
yeah, that's kind of unusual. It's by, I think, Rob Gardner is his name. The whole.
So those who might not know, if you're not a longtime listener, Mr. Smith is actually an avid musical fan.
Well, technically, this isn't a musical. I think it's arias. I think that's what they're called. But there's this performance. Regrettably, the composer is Mormon, and a little bit of Mormon theology does sneak into some of these things. But some of the pieces I've heard is special music performances. And there's this piece where, and one thing I respect about the work is they don't have anyone playing the part, quote unquote, of Jesus. Anytime they're singing about something like that, and they definitely get a lot of things wrong, but they actually just read scriptures to explain what Jesus said or this or that, and sometimes it's just their take on it. They don't get that completely right. However, they have other people singing different parts. They have people singing for Peter, for John, various apostles, and they have one singing for Pilate. And there's a piece in there, I think, called "It Is Enough," or It's Not Enough. Well, I can't remember the exact title, but it's essentially Christ before Pilate. And Pilate is all these. You have the voice of Mary, others, and like, isn't it enough? And he's been beaten and scourged. Isn't it enough? And it's kind of playing on Pilate's talk, because he clearly wants to free this man. He said, "Isn't it enough? Look at everything he's borne." And then he's talking to Jesus directly. And frustrated that Jesus isn't answering him, which you kind of get that sense from the actual gospel accounts. And he says, "Look, don't you understand? I have the power to crucify you or to release you, and you don't talk to me." And to me, it's the power of the music really helps kind of bring like music does, bring another element to it. That even though he did explain, you only have this power because it's been given to you. So Jesus does actually instruct him at that point. But what he doesn't do is give him anything he can work with. And it's interesting because as powerful as Pilate was, Jesus exposes his absolute weakness by not responding and not saying anything. And the frustration in the actor's voice, at least when he sings that part, when he says, "Speaketh thou not unto me," because for all of his power, he's being exposed as someone that he has no control. He's worried politically about what might happen if he doesn't crucify this guy. At the same time, he does seem like he's innocent. He doesn't seem to want to do an unjust thing. And in the end, it's like all of his power is nothing in the face of Christ's silence. He's just trapped like everybody else.
Yeah. And I would argue, actually, interestingly, he shows weakness because he could feel the pressure. He could feel the pressure from the Jews. He was worried about, as a common theme in the New Testament, or here in the gospel accounts, he was afraid of losing his name, his position, his power, his prestige. And they're like, "You're no friend of Rome, if you don't follow through with this."
That's right.
He caved to the pressure. He ultimately was weak in this kind of larger context here of dealing with Jesus Christ.
He absolutely could have, and Jesus could have brought it up. Look how unjust you're being. Look at this. But you know what? He had a mission that was fulfilled better by his silence. We can get so caught up in all the drama that's going on around in the world, and all the political actors and the talking heads and all the meme creators that we just enjoy the image and combination of words that they put together. And all of them are essentially just Herod and Pilate. Because they're a part of the world, they're just pawns being moved around on a board, and we can't allow their priorities to turn into our priorities. We have to be careful. We have a different reason for being. And Jesus Christ, in those moments, didn't behave like someone who's just kind of caught up in the political moment. He actually stayed focused on mission. He is there to accomplish the purposes for which he was sent and to get his message across.
So I have two final concluding thoughts, because you talked about a foundation, and that always, see, this is the thing that helps me the most. So this is probably why I keep going back to this. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff wrong. There's a temptation to want to do something about it, but we are going to do something about it.
Right.
We just have to think more big picture. And when Daniel, revealed to Nebuchadnezzar what the image was he'd seen, and the head of gold, and all the way down, and then down to these feet that are iron and clay, and so they have a real weakness to them. And then you see a mountain come down from heaven and hit the feet, and it breaks apart and it's blown away by the wind, almost as if it doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
And that's the coming kingdom of God, replacing the kingdoms of man here on the earth. It doesn't matter what we do. It does matter what we do. But I mean, in terms of trying to like fix what's going on here, total waste of time. I mean, I hate to put it that brutally, but it really is. I mean, be nice to your neighbor. If he could use your help,
absolutely,
fixing this tree that's fallen down,
right,
which actually happened to me once, that's fine. You know, what is it? Think globally, act locally. Like help your neighbor. But in terms of getting invested in causes and having it take your resources and time, and I would refer to Galatians 6, verses 9 and 10. Because, you know, unless you're single, which you do have more time at your disposal, more discretionary time than you do when you're married. When it doesn't matter if you're the mother or the father, husband or wife. You know, the men tend to be, if we're traditional, occupied with work more and all those things he's got to do, take care of the family, and mom's taking care of her things for the family. But when we do have excess time, resist the temptation to like see what's going on out there in the world and waste your time, bluntly, getting involved in it or trying to get invested in something where you're trying to change things. And remember this important admonition, I would say, from the Apostle Paul. He says, "And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." Verse 10, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith." And I've always understood that as if you have some extra time, look to the household of faith first. See what you could do in your area. I mean, there are widows in almost every area. There's other people that could probably use your help. I mean, start there for, hey, I want to do something good and help people in the body of Christ. That should be your first thought. And so that's about all I have to say today, Mr. Smith.
Oh, well, that's that.
You'll have to conclude for us.
What do I? Okay. Let's see. Well, okay, then I will say this. For all the messages out there that could be shared on social media of your choice, fill it in. For all the messages out there, you know, when it comes to immigration issues, there are hundreds of thousands to literally millions of people out there willing to post on Facebook about those things. When it comes to whether it's social justice of whatever variety you want, or whether it's wokeism and fighting, you know, all of that out there, there's hundreds of thousands to millions of people just ready to post on Instagram about that. You know what? There are precious few people out there willing to be a representative of the kingdom of God, who are completely and absolutely invested in the things of God and representing not that here's how to fix this world, your world, rather you should have hope because there actually is a better world coming. And just don't let people get you caught up in their struggles. Jesus Christ and God the Father have set you aside to get caught up in theirs, and it's a worthwhile struggle.
Smith and Robinson.